Alright, listen up close, because what I'm about to walk you through is the strangest, sickest, most stomach-turning celebrity file I have opened this entire year, and I need every single one of you locked in from this exact second, because Stefon Diggs, yes, Cardi B's baby daddy, the NFL wide receiver, the man that half the internet was defending yesterday, has just been dragged into a settlement so ugly, so layered, so full of receipts, texts, chains, cameras, and courtroom whispers that once you hear the whole thing, I promise you, you will never look at Stefon Diggs the same way again. Not tomorrow. Not next season. Not ever. Because here is what nobody wants to say out loud. Stefon Diggs is not a normal celebrity scandal. Stefon Diggs is not a regular cheating athlete. Stefon Diggs is walking around with more allegations, more lawsuits, more contradictions, and more suspicious paper trails than any active NFL player in the league right now, and every single time a new document drops, Stefon Diggs does the exact same thing: deny, deflect, delete, and send somebody else to handle it. And this week, that pattern finally cracked wide open. Because the man who accused Stefon Diggs of drugging him and touching him, the same man Cardi B publicly called a light-skinned lizard, that man, Chris Griffith, just settled a separate $10 million lawsuit tied to a beatdown that Stefon Diggs' own younger brother is accused of carrying out. $10 million. Settled. Quietly. In the shadows. While the bigger, uglier, more dangerous case against Stefon Diggs himself, the one about what allegedly happened inside that Maryland mansion, is still very much alive and moving forward. And once you understand what this settlement actually means, you're going to realize why Cardi B might be sitting on a bomb she cannot defuse. Truth is, this story has more layers than a wedding cake, and every layer smells worse than the one under it. Let me walk you through the timeline, because the timeline is the whole game. Here's the wild part. According to the court documents obtained by TMZ, Chris Griffith agreed to drop his $10 million lawsuit against Stefon Diggs' brother, Derez, and the Los Angeles apartment complex where the alleged attack took place back in 2023. Chris Griffith claimed that Derez ambushed him, jumped him, stripped him, robbed him of over $100,000 in luggage, jewelry, clothes, and one very specific one-of-one chrome hearts chain that later, and I cannot stress this enough, showed up around Stefon Diggs' own neck at an NFL game. Stefon Diggs literally wore the alleged stolen property in public. On camera. To work. Read that back to yourself. Check this. The chrome hearts chain that Chris Griffith says was ripped off his neck during a beatdown that was captured, on multiple angles, by 4K surveillance cameras in downtown Los Angeles, that same chain later showed up as a trophy piece on Stefon Diggs. And the internet caught it. Screenshots exist. Comparisons exist. Chris Griffith himself pointed it out, described the piece as one of one, and said flat out that Stefon Diggs was flaunting stolen goods. Now if that alone doesn't make your eyebrows lift, I don't know what will. Because see, the beatdown wasn't the beginning. The beatdown was the cover-up. The real story starts 7 days earlier, inside a Maryland mansion that belongs to Stefon Diggs, and it's a story so dark that Chris Griffith says he still cannot sleep through the night without reliving it. According to Chris Griffith's court filing, he and Stefon Diggs went out to several clubs in the D.C. area on the night in question. Somewhere during that night, Chris Griffith says Stefon Diggs handed him something described as a candy. Shortly after taking the candy, Chris Griffith says he started feeling disoriented, dizzy, unable to control his own body. Chris Griffith believes the candy contained a drug or an intoxicating substance he did not knowingly consent to. And that, right there, is the accusation that Stefon Diggs cannot shake, no matter how many times he denies it. Watch this closely. Chris Griffith claims that during the car ride back to Stefon Diggs' Maryland home, Stefon Diggs pulled himself out inside the vehicle and began stroking himself in front of him. Chris Griffith says he told Stefon Diggs to put it away, to stop, to leave it alone. But he also says he was too physically compromised at that point to fully defend himself, to jump out of the car, or to control his body the way he normally would. And when they arrived at Stefon Diggs' house, a house that Chris Griffith describes as a fortress with a vault-like gate taller than a full-grown man. Chris Griffith says Stefon Diggs then put his tongue in his ear and whispered for him to come to the bedroom. And instead of following Stefon Diggs, Chris Griffith says he hid inside a bathroom for 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Frozen. Trapped. Inside the home of one of the wealthiest and most physically imposing wide receivers in the National Football League. Now here is the part that is going to make you sick. When Chris Griffith finally came out of that bathroom, he says Stefon Diggs' younger brother and 2 women were waiting for him. He says they threatened him, told him to stay quiet, then accused him of stealing from the home. He says they stripped him, beat him, and forced him out with nothing, no shoes, no jacket, no bag, no belongings, no dignity. And remember this, Chris Griffith says every single item that was allegedly stolen from him was later posted online by Stefon Diggs' brother as if they were bragging trophies. Chains. Watches. Clothes. Luggage. All of it, paraded on social media. That's not allegedly. That's documented. That's screenshotable. That's why the $10 million lawsuit even had legs in the first place. Alright, let me pause the timeline here for 1 second, because I know exactly what half of y'all are thinking. Y'all thinking, why did Chris Griffith even walk in that house? Why did he stay? Why did he not turn around, hop out the car, run down the driveway, and call somebody? That's a fair question. And Chris Griffith addressed it, directly, on the No Jumper podcast, in an interview that has since gone viral for exactly this reason. Chris Griffith said, and I quote his logic, that Stefon Diggs' house is not a regular row house on a regular street. The gate alone is over 6 feet tall, made of solid material, sealed like a vault, and it does not open unless somebody on the inside presses it open. Chris Griffith said he had hundreds of thousands of dollars in personal belongings already sitting inside the home. He said he was disoriented, drugged, scared, and trying to figure out how he was going to get out with his property intact. He said he genuinely believed if he ran, they would kill him. Because if these people were willing to do what they did in front of surveillance cameras a week later in Los Angeles, in public, what were they willing to do to him inside a private home with no witnesses? That, right there, is the trauma. That is why Chris Griffith is not letting this go. That is why Chris Griffith is not accepting money in exchange for silence on the main case. Because see, this is not a cash grab, even though Cardi B publicly accused him of exactly that. Chris Griffith looked into the camera and said he is doing this for his children. For his last name. For the fact that 2 documented, on-camera attacks happened to him within a 7-day window and nobody in the mainstream media wants to talk about that part. But hold on, because now we have to bring Cardi B into this, and this is where the whole thing detonates. Cardi B, one of the biggest female rappers on the planet, currently in a relationship with Stefon Diggs, currently sharing a baby boy with Stefon Diggs, went live and publicly trashed Chris Griffith. Cardi B called Chris Griffith a liar, called him a thief, accused him of doing this for money, and mocked him as a light-skinned lizard while defending her man on camera. Cardi B said Chris Griffith came to her whispering about money and settlements, and when the story didn't get picked up the way he wanted, he spiced it up and added the sexual allegations. That's Cardi B's official position. That's the Cardi B narrative. But Chris Griffith responded, and he responded like a man with receipts. Chris Griffith said, and this quote is now stamped into internet history, I have too much respect for Cardi and for women in general for me to say anything disparaging back to her. But mama, please take the blinders off. Chris Griffith said his history with Stefon Diggs collective predates Cardi B entirely. He said he could not possibly be the thief in this situation, because he is the only person in the entire equation who has been documented being robbed and beaten on camera, twice, in 7 days. And that's the part Cardi B is going to have to sit with. Because Chris Griffith is not some random social media hater. Chris Griffith has produced, according to court filings, over 100 pages of text messages, iMessages, and Instagram DMs between himself and Stefon Diggs. 100 pages. Photos of the 2 of them together. Established communication. Established relationship. And Stefon Diggs' own legal team is now demanding a judge force Chris Griffith to hand over Instagram messages that Stefon Diggs claims he can no longer access because Chris Griffith blocked him. Read that again. Stefon Diggs is admitting, through his lawyers, that a communication history exists, he just can't get to it anymore. Which raises the obvious question. If you and this man are strangers, why do you have 100 pages of messages with him? If you and this man are strangers, why are there photographs of the two of you together? If you and this man are strangers, why did your younger brother spend a full week hunting him down across 2 different states just to beat him up and take his chains? Truth is, none of this smells like a stranger. None of this smells like a shakedown from a random opportunist. None of this smells like a cash grab, to borrow Cardi B's phrase. Because a cash grab does not survive 100 pages of documentation, 4K surveillance footage, a criminal conviction against Stefon Diggs' own brother in the state of California, and a settlement of one of the 2 active lawsuits. Because let's be clear about something. Stefon Diggs' brother was not just accused. Stefon Diggs' brother was charged and convicted by the state of California for the Los Angeles attack. That's not allegedly. That's a matter of public record. That's the state of California saying, on the record, that Chris Griffith was assaulted, and that Stefon Diggs' brother did it. That fact alone destroys the entire "he's making it up for money" narrative that Cardi B is trying to sell to her fans. And this is the part that Stefon Diggs cannot survive politically. Because in the court of public opinion, Cardi B is not just Stefon Diggs' girlfriend. Cardi B is a shield. Cardi B has an army. Cardi B's fanbase is loud, loyal, and ready to fight anybody who comes at her man. But now Cardi B is publicly defending Stefon Diggs against allegations that come with documented, on-camera, court conviction-level proof of violence. And that is a very dangerous corner to be painted into. Watch this closely, because this is where the story shifts from tabloid to cautionary tale. Some of y'all are old enough to remember what happened with Nicki Minaj and her husband. Nicki Minaj married a man with a permanent record, a registered offender who cannot legally be near schools, cannot be near certain neighborhoods, and cannot escape his own paperwork. And Nicki Minaj spent years trying to defend him, deflect from him, and pretend the internet was lying. And now, every time Nicki Minaj's name trends, that history trends with her. Forever. That is not a comparison I am making lightly. That is a warning to Cardi B, in real time, from history itself. Because Cardi B is on the same slope. Cardi B is publicly attaching her name, her brand, her music, her clothing lines, her endorsements, and her mothering reputation to a man who has settled one lawsuit and is still fighting an active sexual assault lawsuit that involves text messages, photographs, drug allegations, and a locked vault mansion. And if Stefon Diggs loses that second case, the one that is still pending, Cardi B is not going to be able to walk it back. Cardi B is going to be locked to that verdict for the rest of her career. Here's the wild part. Even Chris Griffith knows Cardi B did not sign up for this. In his own interview, Chris Griffith said the reason Stefon Diggs cannot possibly be telling the whole truth is because, and I quote his logic, how many kids were born last year with the last name Diggs? That was Chris Griffith's exact rhetorical. And when the interviewer asked if Cardi B would ever really sign up for all of that if she knew the full picture, Chris Griffith said, calmly, I don't think she would have. That's not an attack on Cardi B. That's Chris Griffith saying, out loud, that Cardi B is being lied to just like he was. Because see, Stefon Diggs has a pattern. Stefon Diggs allegedly had a full model pregnant with a child while Cardi B was carrying his baby. Stefon Diggs has multiple babies from multiple women born within the same calendar window. Stefon Diggs has had public beef with Offset, Cardi B's estranged husband, over Cardi B herself. Stefon Diggs is walking around at the center of a chaos storm so thick that even his own teammates keep their distance. And the settlement, the $10 million settlement with the brother, is not a win. Let me repeat that for the people in the back. The settlement is not a win for Stefon Diggs. The settlement is a firewall. The settlement is Stefon Diggs' family paying money to shut down the softer of two lawsuits so that the harder one, the sexual assault case, can be fought without a second courtroom bleeding out at the same time. That is legal strategy 101. That is not innocence. That is triage. And remember this. The settlement filing does not disclose how much Chris Griffith actually received. The dollar amount is sealed. Which means Chris Griffith may have walked away with anywhere from a symbolic dollar to a real number that would silence a lesser man. And Chris Griffith is still, on the record, pressing forward with the second case against Stefon Diggs himself. That tells you everything you need to know about what Chris Griffith actually wants. Chris Griffith does not want money. Chris Griffith wants a public reckoning. And when the TMZ reporter, bless her heart, but come on, asked Chris Griffith whether he and Stefon Diggs could ever be friends again after all of this, Chris Griffith just stared at her. Because what kind of question is that? A $10 million suit was just settled. A criminal conviction landed in California. A separate sexual assault case is still pending. And you're asking if they're gonna go back to brunch? That was the moment the whole internet realized how absurd this circus has become. Chris Griffith did answer, though. Chris Griffith said, and I'm paraphrasing his tone, that when a known liar accuses you of lying, you don't lose sleep. And when a woman believes a known liar, that's her lesson to learn, not yours. Chris Griffith kept his composure the entire interview. No screaming. No crying. No breakdown. Just receipts, timeline, and cold, calm accountability. Which brings us to the part that nobody in the celebrity commentary space is talking about honestly. This is not a, who's gay, who's straight, story. This is not a story about somebody's private orientation. Because who Stefon Diggs is or is not attracted to is nobody's business, and honestly, none of us care. This is a story about consent. This is a story about violence. This is a story about a wealthy man allegedly drugging a guest, allegedly making unwanted advances, and then allegedly sending his own family to physically punish the guest for refusing him. That is what the second lawsuit is actually about. And that is what Cardi B is going to have to answer for, whether she wants to or not. Because Cardi B's public statement, the one where she called Chris Griffith a light-skinned lizard and mocked his story, is now permanent internet record. If Stefon Diggs loses the second case, that clip of Cardi B mocking Chris Griffith is going to resurface on every timeline, every day, for the rest of her career. That's the risk Cardi B took by going live so early. Cardi B chose loyalty over caution. And loyalty is beautiful until the receipts show up. And the receipts are already showing up. Because Chris Griffith's legal team is now signaling that they intend to add new allegations to the pending case using the very text messages Stefon Diggs' own legal team was forced to hand over during discovery. Read that back. Stefon Diggs' own lawyers handed over messages that Chris Griffith's team is now going to use to amend the lawsuit and expand the accusations. That is a legal nightmare. That is Stefon Diggs supplying ammunition to the very case that could ruin him. Here's the wild part. If Stefon Diggs loses that case, we are not talking about a suspension. We are not talking about a fine. We are talking about the potential end of his NFL career, the collapse of every endorsement he holds, and a permanent civil judgment attached to his name forever. And Cardi B is one bad ruling away from raising a child whose father is a legally adjudicated offender. Let that sit for a second. Let that hit you the way it should. Because see, this is why Chris Griffith keeps going. This is why Chris Griffith settled the smaller case and kept the bigger one alive. Chris Griffith is not chasing checks. Chris Griffith is chasing a verdict. And a verdict is the one thing money cannot silence. Truth is, Stefon Diggs' team knows this. That is why every filing from Stefon Diggs' side is procedural, asking the judge to force Chris Griffith to hand over Instagram messages, asking the judge to compel discovery, asking the judge to delay. Because Stefon Diggs' legal team is trying to buy time. They are not trying to win. They are trying to survive. And the question I need every one of you to sit with, before you drop a comment, is this: if Stefon Diggs really had nothing to hide, why did his brother spend a full week chasing Chris Griffith across 2 states just to beat him and strip him? Innocent men do not send their little brothers to silence a witness. Innocent men do not wear the alleged stolen chain to their own football games. Innocent men do not have 100 pages of private communication with the person accusing them. Alright, let me bring it home, because this whole thing is a masterclass in what happens when money, ego, silence, and shame collide inside the same courtroom. Cardi B is going to have to make a decision. Cardi B is going to have to decide whether Stefon Diggs is worth defending on the record while the record is still being written. Because the record is not finished. The main case is still open. The evidence is still being turned over. And every single week, a new detail drops that makes Stefon Diggs look less like a wrongly accused NFL star and more like a man whose family paid $10 million to shut down the easier of his 2 problems. And Chris Griffith, for whatever you think of him, for whatever your gut tells you about his motives, Chris Griffith has done what almost no accuser in a case like this has ever managed to do. He has documented every step. He has produced text messages. He has produced photographs. He has secured a criminal conviction on the beatdown. He has settled one lawsuit and preserved the other. And he has done every interview on the record, with his real name, his real face, and his real voice. That is not the behavior of a liar. That is the behavior of a man building a paper trail so airtight even Cardi B's fans will not be able to punch a hole in it. So here is my honest verdict on this whole ugly file. Stefon Diggs is in the fight of his life. Cardi B is holding a shield that is starting to crack. Chris Griffith is holding a folder of receipts that is only getting thicker. And the next 12 months of this saga are going to redefine every reputation attached to it, including yours, if you picked the wrong side too early. Now I want to hear from you. I want to know exactly what you think. Do you believe Stefon Diggs is the victim of a coordinated shakedown, the way Cardi B says he is? Do you believe Chris Griffith is telling the truth about the drugging, the touching, the beatdown, and the stolen Chrome Hearts chain? Or do you think this is one of those situations where nobody in the story is fully innocent and nobody in the story is fully guilty? Drop your honest verdict down below and tell me exactly how you're calling this one, because I read every single comment, and I want the smartest room on the internet to weigh in on this one before the next filing drops. And listen, this is not over. Not even close. The pending sexual assault case against Stefon Diggs is still moving. New motions are being filed. New text messages are being processed. New witnesses may still come forward. So if you want to stay ahead of every twist in this story before the mainstream media catches up, stick around, because I'm going to walk you through every filing, every court date, and every rebuttal the second it hits the docket. That's the whole receipt for tonight. I'll catch you on the next storm.